0.5, looks good, bake it again. So next, I want to start dropping things into this world. Let's make a cube show up in my world. And let's make it nice and big. There's a cube. Because we baked it, it doesn't have any effect. Baking happens once when you click that bake button. So let's clear it and then bake it again. Nothing changed because the object was not told that it had to be navigation static. So if we do that, clear it, and bake it again, now Unity can figure out what the world should look like for the navigation mesh. There are a bunch of polygons showing up now, a bunch of triangles here. This is our mesh, and it says avoid getting close to this object. The way that over here we could define obstacles and carve them out and say don't look at them, these squares are irrelevant. Same thing is happening in Unity for us. This hole in the middle shouldn't be navigated. What you want to do as an agent is be wandering around, looking inside the blue pieces, looking at the vertices, figuring out where you want to go based on these polygon pieces. Does that make sense? Okay, and again, once you bake it, I move it around, it doesn't really change anything. But if I clear it, bake it again, then I can say this other spot should be avoided. Does that make sense? Okay. So there's a bunch of layers, things we can bake. You can pick different layers. You can make your own layers. And this is the way we would be able to say, this object is part of the desert. This object is part of something else, and it gets a different cost. So each layer, we can put in there a cost of how much it will take us. And then, like we were seeing in that demo, Unity can figure out this path across the desert will take me twice as long because I have to slow down. I can navigate, theoretically, using these tools along the way. Okay, so what do we want to do next? Let's add another one. Finds out that path around them. Let's actually use it to do some navigation. Let's make things happen. So I want to, let's make our nice sphere here. Drop it off, give it a rigid body. We're good. We really need a light. Can't see anything. There's our directional light. We need to move our camera. Let's get a little closer here. Better. Okay, here's my world. I have a sphere. I have some obstacles. I want to get to the other side. So to do that, let's zoom back in on my game. Give myself, say, an empty game object. Stick it on the other side. Oh, not again. Okay, create empty game object on the other side. We look at our nav mesh. Let's move this one just over here. And our sphere needs to become something called a Nav Mesh agent. We've talked about steering behaviors and agents, moving things around. This is one that can come with Unity. Let's add a Nav Mesh agent to this sphere. Lots of new options come up. This is the automatic way that Unity builds it together. Like we had the first person, third person character controllers that you can drop in. This is the default way of using a Nav Mesh from Unity. There's ways to break this apart and do this stuff yourself and incorporate navigation into larger pieces of what's going on. But this is the simplest way to understand how these nav meshes work in Unity. We have some agent wandering around. I can walk on everything. I have a certain speed. Let's make it a little slower. I have some acceleration, angular speed of what's going on. It doesn't do anything because our script needs to be set up. We drop a script that I wrote earlier on it. I'll show you what it does. Basically took that ghost script from our earlier game, deleted it a bit, and said, when you start, make this code routine go that says go towards some target. Nav Mesh agent, go get that component. That agent's destination should be the target's position. Hook those things together, and then 2 seconds later, wake up again and do this resetting, because your target might be moving. We'll incorporate that here in a little bit, but I have a possibility for a target. Let's put this empty game object in there, and then let's see what happens. Navigates around those obstacles, decelerates, goes back to my target. Nice. And if we watch it from the scene with the navigation on, oh man, my screen is so small. Okay, this is horrible. You should be able to see it. I can't make this any bigger, I don't think. Just a second. Yes. Oh, so much better. Still a little weird. Okay, where's my scene? Here we go. The red is that path that it's found. And it's looking through these polygons, it's shaded slightly differently, to get back to where we want to go. Does that make sense? So Unity can incorporate these ideas of an A-star search and optimal pathfinding into your games that you make. Any questions? Let's see what else Unity has in terms of these nav meshes. So, this is my scene. Let's open up another scene that I created earlier. Nav Mesh demo. Oh yes, save my scene. Good. Let's run it. There's 2 pieces I want to show you. Somehow we got it to navigate flying up in the air. And if I look back at my scene, there's something strange going on. There is an off-mesh link that says from this spot, you can get to that spot. You can bake your nav mesh on top of all the objects you want. So you could have the nav mesh at different levels. And if you had varying surfaces, you could just make it wander up there itself. Remember, the baking has this maximum slope of 45 degrees. If in your scene you have something that's a 30-degree slope, that blue nav mesh will navigate up it, like we were seeing back in here. That was the picture, and the nav mesh can climb those stairs and say you're wandering up them because the slopes are within the baking's parameters. But if you want to be able to go somewhere you're not really supposed to go according to all the baking, then you can add off-mesh links. So here's how I did that. I've got this object which has an off-mesh link component, and that component gets two transforms. You say, here's your starting point, here's your ending point. Do I want it to be bidirectional, so if I get up there I can come back down? Or is it a unidirectional kind of pathway that I can only go in one spot? You drop those in. They could be other empty game objects so you don't see them. In my scene right now, I made them these cylinders that are out there, so you can see here's where it goes and there's where it jumps up. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's do this again, and I'll talk about the other piece. Okay. It avoided this obstacle. It's going to try its best to get up there. But when I move, it's like, oh, wait, it's open now. No, you can't get there. Oh, it's open. No, I'm sorry. This involves a bit more than just your basic A-star, because it's continually refining its path of where to go. And in just a second, let me go back.
It's like when your friend's trying to get in a car. He goes to get the handle, and every time you reach for the handle, you like drive a foot.
Okay, so here's that underlying nav mesh. This cube is a nav mesh obstacle. There's two ways to use it. Oh, it's going to get there. Oh, it made it up. Okay, so there's two ways to use an obstacle. One is to just be some obstacle that it tries to avoid with steering behaviors, the obstacle avoidance that you've seen and maybe some of you implemented. The other way is to have it dynamically carve out a portion of the nav mesh itself. Baking is awesome, but sometimes dynamically you need to change the nav mesh. So nav mesh obstacles, they're much more expensive. They are going to slow down your game speed enormously because it's constantly having to recompute all these triangles, constantly having to refigure out what is my optimal path. There's dynamic, optimal ways that it's doing it, but it is more expensive than a traditional bake a space, figure it out, plan it out theoretically first, and then just follow that path. Okay, so all this baking stuff only really happens before you start the game. You have to have all your pieces in there. Unless things are going to be obstacles, that bake button isn't available dynamically to say, here's a nav mesh, go ahead and bake it after you make a scene. So we've done that before when we were making our mazes. So let's look at my scene. That is not the right scene. Maze with nav mesh. Here's what I had to do to dynamically create my maze wanderer and solver. I baked a nav mesh that is enormous, and then I'm going to drop on my maze and turn every maze piece into an obstacle that carves things out. Let's just see what those are going to be down here in my wall.